yeah. So are we live?
Just went live. Yeah, I want to go ahead and get started because I got since Facebook doesn't allow third party to jump into groups anymore, I have to go live and then I got to share it in at least 2 groups real quick. And I'm going to do that right now very quickly. So how are things going so far today? And then I'll get started right afterwards.
Good. Well, I'm in Europe.
Okay.
So yep, and so I had actually personal surgery, health wise, a couple weeks ago in Switzerland. So I got that done. So I'm still in recovery mode a bit, which is
Okay.
part of the reason why I'm not dressed in the well, I am dressed, but I'm not.
You did get step 1 done, which is put on a shirt. So I think you're good.
There you go. There you go. We do live in sort of this unique age where it's no longer suit and ties on video. So
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Do you think, to start off, do you think it might even come across a little bit more relatable to the market in terms of agents and other people that are in the business?
yeah, well, for sure. I mean, there different styles are gonna appeal to different people, right? So
Right.
there's zero doubt about that. When I started selling real estate 22 years ago, I wore the khaki slacks, the white shirt, the tie, the blue blazer. I mean,
Yep.
that was my uniform. And actually I stood out then because I was in Bellingham, Washington, which is considered to be a very granola community. So very health foodie, outdoorsy, and I literally had one person that came in. It only happened once, but he literally told me that he wouldn't work with me because I was wearing a tie,
No
and so
way.
I ended up finding another guy in the office, guy named, I think his name was Russ, but anyway, I found him in the office, and he was very much a dirt guy. So he like land and walking properties, and he's always wearing the jeans and the boots, and he was in the office that day, and he looked like he'd just come. And I introduced him, and they got along just perfectly fine. So I got a little referral out of it, but that was
Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard a long time ago when I first entered the business that dressed just one level higher than the client that you're going to meet. And maybe you didn't know, who that person was at the time, but if there were a jeans and t-shirt guy, you wear jeans and a collared t-shirt. It's just that one little extra, a little bit higher. I don't do that too much anymore, but that's what I was told when I first entered the business.
yeah, no. One, I think you do have to show a level of professionalism because obviously you're helping people make the biggest purchase or list a property, and that type of thing. I think listing agents are a different than working with buyers. So I think listing agents, it's 2 levels higher, or
Right. Oh, that's a good
than
point.
big. Because a lot of times when you come into somebody's home and you're going to list their home, I mean, they're very comfortable. Like they're not,
Right.
so so I think there's a level of professionalism, especially on the list side, that is will help you stand apart. But working with buyers, I think you're spot on because I think that builds a level of rapport when you're looking at homes, and then makes you more relatable when you're talking about all the things that are going on with the different properties.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially for newer agents who are entering the business to hear from you. That's a good pointer to start off with. So what I'm going to do is introduce you. I feel like most people know you, but let's just do it anyways. Glenn Sanford, ladies and gentlemen, CEO eXp World, CEO of eXp World Holdings, CSO, Chief Strategy Officer of Verbella, CEO of Success Enterprise, and an Ironman and marathoner. Is that about correct? Do I have it right?
Yeah, so I need to update my LinkedIn profile. Uh,
Uh-oh.
so I'm no longer doing the CSO stuff
Okay.
or the Success Magazine stuff. In fact, we've been scaling up a Frame VR, which is a really cool web-based
Yep.
metaverse, which we've moved everything over to Frame.
Yep.
But obviously, Verbella's cool company, and they've built a great product, and we've bought them, incubated them, and now we've kind of wound them down a bit. Now, kind of helping them find a new home. for their platform, because in my mind, I feel like the web is really, for what we do, the future of engagement and collaboration, in terms of just being able to jump in on a URL from anywhere and have conversations.
Right, right, right. Just like eXp World now, right?
Yep.
That's awesome. So I did find a few things that I'm curious about that I'd love to ask you about. You were involved with with a number of internet startups in the 1990s and early 2000s. Which one do you which one sticks out to you the most, that you've learned the most from? Which one comes to mind?
Yeah, so I learned a lot from all of that. I mean, I started in the early 90s. I worked at AOL, but I was already in online services. I was already a tech entrepreneur in the early 90s. By the mid 90s, I started Interactive Cafe, which was became the largest online service in Western Canada. And then eventually, in 98, 99, I wrote a business plan, which this is where I learned the most, in terms of just people and things, which was eshippers.com, which was an outsourced e-commerce and logistics company. So we were providing websites for small to mid-sized manufacturers and retailers, and then from there we were helping them with the pick and pack, and then even last mile delivery. So we were doing a lot of stuff that sort of at the time was web bound, and there was some grocery delivery companies, and then of course Amazon. But we were kind of playing in that space, and so we really needed to raise about $40 million of capital, and then I had a boneheaded business partner who, at the time, wouldn't allow me to make the investments that we need to make, and so his phrase was, "He who has the gold makes the rules," and since I was
Mm,
relying on him for capital, I decided that eventually, once that all sort of crashed and burned because of the dot-com collapse, that I was going to not have partners in that same way, and then board of directors that didn't know what the heck I was doing. So those were a
yeah.
couple big learnings. Was, controlling your own destiny as an entrepreneur is a really important element that I learned somewhat the hard way, because I think the business model was great, but that's what ultimately got me into real estate, because I was literally saying, okay, how do I pay the bills while I'm looking for my next project?
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like, you had almost a gatekeeper or a bottleneck of what you wanted to create and what you wanted to expand into. What do you tell the person who is currently dealing with that now? They have these cool ideas, they have these different things they want to implement, but they have, let's call them quote unquote leadership that is saying, hey, we've always done it this way, and this is how we're always going to do it. What kind of advice would you give that person that sees a bigger picture in that model?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, you have to create so much momentum that it sort of overwhelms the other party.
Mm,
So I think there's a the reality is if you can go out there and make a big enough mess as an entrepreneur, then to some extent the rest of the group that might be holding you back will eventually have to sort of follow the lead, because you're doing so much cool stuff.
yeah.
So and I would say that that the entrepreneurs, in my mind, good entrepreneurs aren't afraid of getting fired. Like, to some extent, their drive and their need to create something of 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 a significance is so great that at the end of the day, they're not going to slow up because of somebody else.
Yeah.
And 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 then eventually you come to a bit of a fork in the road, because you're going to have a clash of this sort of cultural whatever. Um, there's a lot of entrepreneurs. I think about a lot of people. Obviously, real estate agents are by their nature entrepreneurs. They probably didn't like working in a more traditional manner, following sort of the rules of the road that was being handed down to them by some other boss or what have you. And so
Yeah.
they needed the freedom to do their own thing, and to kind of do that. Now that doesn't mean that they were successful, because there's a lot of people who go from that and then crash and burn.
Yeah.
but that was part of the, that's part of the psyche of a real estate professional. A good real estate professional is fundamentally unemployable, in a traditional sense,
Yeah.
because they're being so proactive on behalf of their clients. They're being so proactive relative to their marketing and lead gen efforts and all that stuff, that if you put them in a traditional setting, it will drive traditional people nuts. So anyway, hopefully that kind of touches a couple of the little threads there. But that would be sort of some of the thinking I'd have.
Yeah, it does. And I love you almost said it in a quote of just momentum and disruption. You just have this momentum and disruption where enough people see the light that they have no choice but to follow it, or at least bend a little left or right in order to, kind of accomplish the vision that you have as well. So I love that. I got another question for you. You ready, Glenn?
I am.
All right. And companies that are looking to scale, it can be difficult to have others see and believe your vision of the company. You started with 25 agents. What did the conversation look like to have them believe in your vision? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so technically I started with 0 agents. It was
Well,
me,
that's
and
true.
then I hired, these were just people that were already with me on the journey. And so I was already having regular conversations around entrepreneurship, around how business works. And I'd had some great mentors, prior to getting into real estate. So whether it be, my dad, I had another gentleman who worked for a Australian billionaire who had some really cool ideas on sort of work. I was a voracious reader, and I got fired from every job that I ever had. So I had all this stuff sort of leading up to this, and so I would always be coaching them in this sort of different way of operating. And what was interesting is they all loved it. They all sort of took it up like a sponge. I was kind of worried at some level that I was giving them sort of this playbook that they could go and use anywhere else that they ever wanted to use, but they
Right.
really stayed with me through that whole journey. And so when we made the shift in 2009, from Buyer Tours Realty to eXp, keep in mind we're at the bottom of the housing market. I'd shut down four physical offices. We were we were we I'd been talking to another company that actually wanted me to they wanted me to be their CEO, but they didn't want to pay me what I believed that I was worth. And so and then after about 6 months, they actually came back around and said, "Okay, we'll give you everything you want." Like, hey, I told you what you guys should be doing. I built the whole business plan out. You guys didn't, jump on. And I was talking with my whole team this whole time, and my team basically had come to me and said, "Why are we going? Why are we even considering going that way? We've done now all the work. Why don't
Yep.
we do it ourselves?" So to some extent, like, I didn't lose anybody. Like, it wasn't like one. We were basically a teamerage. We were high lead generation, high accountability, workflows. I had the 6 of the top ranked websites around the country for. If you typed in Seattle real estate, we were number 1. Phoenix real estate, we're number 2. Las Vegas real estate, we're number 1. Nashville real estate, we're number 2. Portland real estate, we're number 1. Bellingham, Washington, we're number 1. So we had all these highly ranked organic websites on Google, Yahoo, and some of the other portals that I don't even know what their names are anymore. But but this was really feeding this engine, where the agents were somewhat dependent on the lead flow. But one thing that I did, when we made the shift from Buyer Tours to eXp, is I knew that we couldn't scale lead gen. So we actually abandoned that whole strategy, which was, I mean, you think about it, we had the top ranked websites, which, you look at, having the number 1 site for Seattle. I mean, you could easily today make 2, 3, $4 million a year net on that type of ranking, like, just in terms of just the lead flow that's coming through. But when we sort of looked at it, we're like going, hey, we're going to actually give you these leads instead of on a 50-50 split. We're going to actually do it at a 25%, split. And then we did our 80-20 on the eXp side, and we just turned the leads over to the agents and just said, hey, work them, don't work them. We're doing a different model, but you're still getting all the lead flow. But here's where we're going. And in reality, I don't think we lost a single person in that transition.
What were some of the conversations that pulled? Because obviously you had your own vision of what you wanted this thing to look like. And sometimes when we surround ourselves with talented people, at some level we stop pulling and they start pulling us. What were some of the early conversations that maybe you had an idea or a thought and the circle around you pulled you in a different direction because it made a little bit more sense or altered the vision a little bit, I guess, better or strengthened it? What were some of those early conversations?
Well, I bounced lots of different things off of people. So I was always seeking input. And then from that, I would go back to the drawing board, and then I'd come back and then I represent it. Now, at the end of the day, I got to make the call on what we did. Because at the
Right.
time, it was really was, it was really my company. But I wanted to collaborate on where we were going. And if I, um, and these, most of these folks have been working with me for 2, 3, 4 years at that point in time. So they understood, some of the stuff that I was attempting to do and why I was trying to do it and what we were ultimately looking to accomplish. But our rev share model, that was bouncing it off of multiple people. We had originally there was a company, I don't know that it's around anymore. It might be, but it was a company called Connect Realty. It was based out of Houston, Texas, and they had built. Well, at the time, we go back in 2009. There was a company called Next Stage. There was a company called Connect. There was Keller Williams. There was Exit. So these are all companies that shared some sort of revenue or profit. Exit still around, did one level, 10% up until an agent caps. I think they did an 80-20 split or something like that. Anyway, they had their model. Then Next Stage had a really complicated, it was hard to understand model. Connect was a 5-5-5 model. So you got 5% of your first level. If you had 5 or more frontline people, you got 5% of your second level. And if you had 10 or
Mm-hmm.
more, you got 5% of your third level. So it was just 3 levels. And that was actually the company that I was talking to about being their CEO. And what I realized is just with my own agents, because we had agents in 6 different cities around the country. So, when you add it all up, it's closer to 50 agents. Um, but when I started to look at, who brought who in, and we had kind of a little bit of a revenue share system already baked into Buyer Tours Realty, I noticed a ton of the people that I would have in the organization would go well past, levels 3, 4, and 5.
Right.
And so when I started to look at it, I'm like going, you know, three's way too few. And then we looked at, sort of and then we looked at, the Keller model, and then we said, okay, how do we win at every level of production, cap splits, and then revenue share model. And when we started to really do the math, we determined that a 7-level revenue share program was a pretty darn good program. But a lot of that came from just discussions back and forth, and kind of, what should it look like, and how should we tweak it, and what percentage should be on each level. And then, we've got, this thing called the expansion share. Most people don't even know it exists, but basically it doesn't matter how many people you bring in eXp, you get paid on 7 levels. Most people don't know that. Like, you don't have to
Yeah.
bring a single extra person in. And as your organization grows, it actually matches up with a profitable Keller Williams office just based on the expansion share and the exponential share on level 1. So, but we started, we kind of built all these things out, and it just naturally came to be that this would be a great model. And I had, experience with, I don't know, 4 or 5 different network marketing companies in different capacities, whether it was a distributor or doing some technology and tools. I did websites for network marketers back in the mid 90s, but I had a really good background in what that meant and how that sort of overlapped. So I'd share that with the team, and then we tried some different things. Some stuff failed miserably, but ultimately, when we launched in October of 2009, so we're almost exactly 15 years to the day, we had a pretty good sense of what the model should look like. But that was through months of conversations from February through probably July of 2009.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. What were some of those? just so, because some people can look at others and say, "Hey, man, that was pretty easy for you," or "Oh, it must be nice being successful," or whatever it is. What were some of the failures that did happen? Like you mentioned, like, oh man, some of those failed miserably. What are some of those failures?
Well, I mean, we almost went based. I don't want to say bankrupt, but we basically, if I didn't have some what we call creative financing, out of the box thinking, going between 2008 and 2009, we would have been out of business. And because we were, I talk about this idea that in 2008 in April we were closing $7 million a month in closed transactions, and average price point was like $200,000 or something like that. So it wasn't huge, 225. Not like today, it's like 400 to 600,000.
Yeah.
And so we were closing quite a number of transactions, and then in October we closed $700,000 worth of closed transactions, so 10% of the volume. Our expenses were about 50,000 a month, so we had to quickly and then my assistant in October of 2009, not or no, in October 2008, she just up and left, and I'm like, I have no clue what's going on here. Like we're in the bottom of the housing market. You're gainfully employed. I've never missed a paycheck. Nobody's never got paid. And then she up and left, and we'd have been having conversations about where are things at in the credit cards and this and that. And she says, "Oh yeah, we've got closings coming in. Everything's good." Well, it turned out bank account was basically zero, and the cards were maxed out, and she didn't want to have the conversation with me about going about that. And so instead she left, and
Oh,
then I logged in. I literally logged into the bank accounts like literally that night, because I'm like scratching my head on this whole thing, like, why are you quitting a job?" And so I quickly figured out that we were broke. And but I had again go back to six of the top ranked websites in the country. So we even had some, like Vancouver Power Search was the #1 ranked website for Vancouver, BC, Canada, as well. So I ended up in like less than a week, taking three. I think it was three of the websites. It might have been yeah, two or three of the websites, and I basically raised money against those websites, and then I put that into the company. So I raised 150,000. We got through to into 2009, but it was a little bit by the skin of my teeth. We ended up launching, because we were probably the #1 SEO team in the country. I mean, you think about all the websites that we had sort of ranked at #1, and so we launched a company called Working the Magic. And Working the Magic was basically doing all of the gray hat, black hat, white hat, SEO stuff to get websites ranked. So we were ranking for future competitors' websites, and within 6 weeks to 3 or 4 months, we would take a website from basically zero to in the top three in Google, and
wow.
it was easy for us. But we would charge things like we I think we charged $18,000 to do that, but we had a database, so literally it took us maybe 10 hours to do the work to actually get a website ranked. It was crazy what we were able to do back then. But we had to do a lot of sort of creative things to get into 2009, and then 2009 was like, okay, we're still sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul and trying to figure it
Yeah.
all out. And then we're iterating, and then of course the market's starting to come back a little bit. So we've got some closings coming on, but we trimmed back all the expenses, and then of course we got into October, and then it's like we're going, okay, this is either going to work or it's not going to work, and if it doesn't work, we're all looking for work. So that was
Yeah.
that was my motivational speech for the team.
Well, that's funny you say that, because I was going to ask a question. I was told years and years ago that people are the greatest asset you can have in your business, but they're also the most volatile. And so for someone to just get up and leave in that moment, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And then you had to find out yourself on what that looked like. My question was going to be, you know, back in the day, many years ago, if something happened, what I would do is try to correct it, fix it, and then present it. So say, here's the issue or challenge that we have as a team or a personal life, whatever it is. However, this is what I've done so far. Here's the plan moving forward. Did you, when you found that out, like, oh man, there's no money in the bank, did you have a conversation almost immediately with the team that you had, or did you just go into solution mode, come with a solution, and then, kind of open up and be transparent with the team? How did that go?
No, I think I was pretty transparent with the team. It's literally within 24, 48 hours. I mean, the core team knew. Now, fortunately, I had a really great team. Like, so we had a revenue sharing system in Buyer Tours at the time, and we had a number of people who had accumulated for that next month, like two or three or $4,000. But we also went and we were raising money for to get into 2009, and virtually every single person that had accumulated money literally volunteered to become an equity shareholder
Mm.
in the new entity. And so one of the individuals, now we did lose somebody. He ended up dating somebody from another company that I won't name, and but he ended up leaving because of that. But he had got the equity,
Oh,
and I think it put $3,500 or $4,000 in. Anyway, after we became a public company, and I think by 2018, 2019, that 35 or $4,000 had turned into almost $1 million, maybe more. Like, it was
wow.
pretty crazy, the money that person made by just being. Now, we had some people literally put in. One person put in 25,000, and that ended up turning into about $4 to $6 million at its peak.
Yeah.
And so, but but that's but again, they knew what we had built already as a team, and so they all believed in what we were doing, and they knew I wasn't going to quit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a quote that says, I can't hear what you're saying because your actions are too loud. And it sounds like your actions were so loud that they knew that you weren't going to quit. They knew that you were going to keep moving forward. So it was worth putting that investment in. I've went to a few high schools, and I'm still doing this. I'll finish this year doing it. And I'm talking to kids about entrepreneurship. And one of the questions I got to ask was, how do you find the people that should be closest to you in terms of your circle? And it sounds like you had a pretty solid circle. How did was it naturally, or even if it is naturally, what are some of the qualities that you're looking for the close circle relationships, personal and professional, that help you advance, like that story in the business when you needed it?
Yeah, so there's different places you can build your circle. Um, so I'm a voracious reader. I'm an entrepreneur. When I did the disc profile, there's the disc and the values. I'm like two standard deviations above the line relative to theoretical, which means that you know, I could as easily have been at home as an academic, sort of ideating out the next way of doing whatever. But I also, I'm like a standard deviation below the line in terms of my ability to tolerate risk. So I'm very risk tolerant. So I'm hugely risk tolerant. Um, and but I'm also, I'm very high D, as you probably can tell. And then the other piece is I'm an introvert, and that's where sort of the voracious reader and audios and that type of thing. So when I and so I'm stubbornly independent, which is partially in the high D category.
Right.
But I love to attend things. So I was a big Inman guy. So I went to Inman, and I would go to the to the to the tech breakouts, and I would go to the RE bar camps that were really big back then. And I would go to sort of the more esoteric breakouts because I was looking for the edge on what we could do. So my my sphere of folks were these, I would call it the misfits of real estate, in that they were thinking about things like blogging, SEO, CRM, automation, um, uh, uh, you know, all of that type of stuff on one level. Then I nerded out on books by Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence, Leader's Guide to Radical Management by Stephen Denning, which I don't think was, it might have been written at that time, but it came out shortly thereafter. But there was a number of books that I listened to the audios time and time and time and time again. So I probably listened to like the tapes back in the 90s, which there was tapes on a book, In Search of Excellence. And I probably listened to those tapes at least a dozen times in the car, going between sales conversations and business building stuff and whatever. And I was just absorbing. And there was a bunch of stuff
Right.
that was sort of that way. So I wasn't, and I had a couple quasi mentors, but I didn't spend much time with them. Like maybe an hour every month or two. We get together for this or that. But I really was, because I'd been listening to all of this content and absorbing all of this stuff. I was very confident in what I thought would work. And then of course I started, a dozen or more. I think I counted at 17 at my peak. 17 businesses that some of them made a little bit and then they kind of crash and burn, or some of them made a bit and it wasn't. I could see that there was a ceiling of achievement that I wasn't going to be able to break through, so I abandoned that. So there was a lot of just trial and error to kind of get to where I ultimately sort of got to. But it was really a combination of that. My dad was a big mentor of mine, so I talked to him about a lot of stuff that I was, trying to do and that type of thing. But it was more in the same vein of bouncing ideas off of people, getting their feedback, and then taking the feedback that I thought was constructive, and then just keep on sort of iterating.
That, and I heard in there, and I guess I'll form it into a question. How important is it to understand oneself to attract the circle that you desire to help grow with you?
Well, I think it's important for sure. One, if you don't understand yourself, you don't really, and you have to understand yourself in the context to other people. So, when you think about, do your own personal SWOT analysis, which I've done, which is your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats. What are you strong at? And how do you, and then where are you weak that if you don't figure out a way to solve for could bring you down over time. So, so when you think about what's the threats, and what's your weaknesses. So I think you have to do that. And then you do have to know who you are. Like I talked to a gentleman here recently who, he's a really interesting guy, a guy named Craig Mundy, but he's head of strategy for Microsoft. He's mentoring a number of really unique people in the industry. He's just coming out with a book with Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger in November. So he and I got a chance to just visit on some stuff. But he had this sort of framework especially in Microsoft days, that he figured out that only about 0.5% of people are really cut out to be true entrepreneurs. Um, and, um, and, and, and they're pretty rare. And in Microsoft, they had these people, but then they actually encouraged them to go off and start startups. They would hold an equity stake and then they would sort of reabsorb them back in order to allow these people to continue to thrive. Because entrepreneurs generally are will get sort of almost choked inside of their own organization as the organizations get larger. Certainly something I've even personally experienced, but I think I've broken through that. Just even with eXp, we're largest single real estate brokerage in the world. And you look at the entrepreneurial backbone of the leaders that are now involved in kind of doing stuff. It's pretty incredible. But there's almost a an immune system that will hold you back. So you have to figure out what that is. And if you're wired right, and you understand who you are, and you understand the pitfalls of what you're doing, then it's a lot easier to kind of get to where you're going. Um, and I even figured out that it took me till I was 35 before I really had the entrepreneurial backbone to feel like I could succeed, um, uh, in spite of the backdrop of what was going on. So that's when I got into the real estate industry. I'd already built, a fairly good muscle around entrepreneurship, but now I was taking it really seriously, and it was no longer me being an entrepreneur to learn how to be an entrepreneur. It was me being an entrepreneur to actually make it work. And there was a different mindset shift that took place. But all that was, fundamentally centered around knowing who I was.
Yeah, yeah. And I bring that up because, when I asked about the circle, you already had an idea of what you were interested in. And then you started going to those places and meeting and masterminding and having these conversations with other people. So it's a good point to then, distribute to others who ask me that question. You just have to understand who you are. And you're, like you said, do a SWOT analysis of yourself, which I love. Also, I have a buddy that owns a tattoo shop. He's the first one that I know that have done this in our local area, which is the turnover in a tattoo shop is high. They believe that they could go on their own and do their own thing. So what he did is the same thing. He encourages, as he brings them on, they're all 1099, encourages them that, hey, I would love to see if that's what you so desire to build your own business. I would love to get a little bit of equity and I'll help you scale it. It's the same like they'll go out, they'll build businesses. He has a little bit of equity. And then sometimes it will be absorbed right back into the company that he has. So I think that's genius that they're doing that as well and allowing them to flex that entrepreneurial muscle to see if that's what they really want or not. You also mentioned that sometimes you hit that ceiling and then you would just kind of let those businesses go. How do you know when the business should be let go? Because sometimes we get so tied into that baby that we built that we're like, just keep showing up, keep showing up. When do you know when to let go and move on?
Yeah. So, well, one, you have to go back to like Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the first axiom is be proactive. The second one is begin with the end in mind, and in
Mm,
order to know what boats to burn, you actually have to know where you're going. So if you don't really know fundamentally where you're going, then you don't know if what you're doing ultimately serves or doesn't serve that bigger goal or need or desire. Like we all have, inherent, needs and desires, and each one of them is different. And but I think there's, everybody has probably a desire of some level of significance, legacy, passing on, certain knowledge or assets or culture or what have you to the next generation. But unless we actually take the time to document what that looks like in the future, then sometimes you really can struggle to actually know if what you're doing is ultimately getting you there. And what ends up happening is a lot of times if you don't do that former exercise, which is begin with the end in mind, then you start to actually accept what you have as
yeah.
being what you'll have.
Mm,
And and then you don't actually have a reason or a purpose to burn the boats. I mean, it's providing you, well, the term would be, from a financial perspective, it provides you lifestyle income. So it pays the bills, allows you to go on a few vacations and that type of thing. But does it actually set you up for long-term retirement? Which is a really big deal. Like in my mind, you lifestyle income's great if it actually can fund your life. But if it
yeah.
can't, then you probably are working on the wrong vehicle. But if you don't actually go back and actually check w- whether that will actually do or serve that purpose, then when you get to the point where you actually have to ask the question, how do I keep on paying my bills? It's almost too late.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you have to understand, is what you're doing serving you? Don Hobbs, who, he's with eXp, as you know. But I went to Hobbs Herder in October 2008, I think it was, and or maybe it was September. Anyway, I went to a mega managing, and they asked from stage, "What's the purpose of a business?" And what would be the standard answer?
To fund a perfect life. That's what I've heard.
Okay, well, that's better than what most people will go with. The purpose of business is to make money. That's the purpose of business, and
Right.
and then you go, well, the answer that came out of that was the purpose of a business is to serve the needs of the owner. So, which, by the way, would be sort of funding the perfect life, would sort of almost be a parallel to that.
Yeah.
But does a company have to make money in order to serve the needs of the owner? Nonprofits, that's by definition, they're not designed for that. So that could be that's a type of business. So then, but it's very freeing to kind of work backwards. Say, okay, if the business is supposed to support me, if the purpose of the business is to serve the needs of the owner, then what are my needs? And so at that point in time, I actually sort of articulated what I believed was the needs of me, the owner, and I created this thing called the 4 A's, which is I needed to be able to work from anywhere with anyone on anything at any time. And and you think about, what does that mean? You and I are having a conversation. We're not in the same office physically. We're not even in the same time zone. I'm in Europe.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not sure where you're at
North
the moment.
Carolina. Yeah.
North Carolina. And and we can do this together, so we can do anything, like have this conversation, ideate, create new businesses, brainstorm, what have you. And we could have done this really at sort of any time. So it's work with anyone, you and me, from anywhere, you know, on anything at any time. So that's where I kind of created the 4 A's, and then I think about the idea that creates business constraints, meaning that if I'm going to be able to work from anywhere at any time with anything, with anybody on anything, then I need to build a business that everybody's uberly connected, without me going to a physical office, because the physical office creates a place constraint.
Yeah.
And then you start to kind of work backwards from that. And there were some other things. 2009, I couldn't afford offices anyway, so we had kind of come up with this business constraint, which is we need to be able to build a real estate business that's not dependent on bricks and mortar. And then we had to kind of work backwards from that. But all these kind of all intermix and sort of play together in how do you create these new businesses.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's such a good point, because I quit UPS. I was at UPS for 12 years before I got into real estate, and I left other companies, other firms, to come to this firm, and it all aligned with the one thing that I was looking at, is that I could pass away at any moment. Not that I'm sick, but I could walk across the street and get hit by something. And I have a family to take care of, and everything had overhead and liability. And there's no way that my wife would want to take on a traditional 7-level team, with all the management and there's no way. So everything went through that filter, and we created a much more of an extreme passive, very low overhead, very low liability businesses that we've invested in. And when a business idea comes up, it all runs through that filter. So with the end in mind. I love that. And it's a reminder, and I appreciate that. You have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions, because I want to respect your time. What personal value used to be extremely important to you that has recently flipped?
Well, probably the one that's probably top of mind is, as an entrepreneur, and sort of where the way I was raised, we didn't put a lot of emphasis on things like birthdays and those types of things. So I ignored, like, to some extent, I ignored fundamentally my birthday and other people's birthday. I thought it's just another day.
Yeah.
So that now I'm that's a value that I would say is more recently flipped, probably, 57, turning 58 this month. And so, thinking about, legacy and that type of thing, like there was a fair number of, we'll just say, fundamentally birthdays that I wasn't as, you know engaged with, excited about, etc. when I was younger, because my entrepreneur gene was really sort of the driver gene. Now I've still got the driver gene, but I've also now started to recognize that I need to put more time, effort, and I also fundamentally now value those things more, those types of activities. So I think that's one that is probably, just top of mind, because I've been kind of working through that, and how does that sort of show up in my life, that type of thing. Um, yeah, there's probably some others, but that's sort of the top of mind one.
Yeah, I think a lot of entrepreneurs would definitely resonate with that. And I've even had to, when we go on vacation or we get some like family time away, and this is something I need to work on, Glenn, is that I like to set an appointment with someone in that area to discuss something. If it's an agent, if it's a business owner, but I feel like to kind of kick up my feet is a wasted time. So I appreciate that. And that's something that, and my birthday's this month. So is that a sign? Probably. So I appreciate that. Um, the last question before you head out is, what is one of the worst pieces of advice that you have got?
Um, I don't know about worst pieces of advice, but the one piece of advice that I think is, it doesn't make a lot of sense, um, early stages, which is to hire, what is it? Hire slowly and fire quickly. So you probably
Yeah,
heard that advice.
yeah.
Like, I actually think that's really not good advice. If you're a good entrepreneur and you know people, you should be able to hire quickly good people. And if you've got a big enough vision, you'll draw people to your vision, and you'll be able to kind of quickly assess, would this person be a good person on the team, and literally, can you bring them on the team that day, or 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 that hour, or can you start working together like
Mm,
right away. You're going to learn way more about your assessment of people by doing that quickly in your career. And then the follow on is, you need to invest in the people that you bring along, along your journey. And so the uh, you know which really means you don't fire people quickly. You invest your time, your energy. Now that doesn't mean that you don't let people go. You do, but it's not. It's because part of the responsibility of bringing somebody on the journey is you're making an investment in them. You're helping them improve their value to the marketplace, but you're also helping them improve their value in the business that you're doing, and that takes time. And if somebody doesn't get it, or doesn't get you, it may be more on you than it is on them. And so I would say, my advice, especially if you're just starting off as an entrepreneur, there's lots of ways to do it in a low risk way, but I'd rather bring people along and hire quickly, and then work with the team, that you've got as you kind of go, rather than getting into the weeds of, I never use, like at the old company, recruit select. I never, I didn't run people through a disc profile. I basically asked them, "What do you want to do?" And then, "Hey, I've got something that fits what that looks like. Would you be willing to jump in and help me? And by the way, it's 10 o'clock this morning. Can you start at 1?" And that's how I hired my first transaction coordinator. I literally walked around the KW office that I was in, and I just moved over from Prudential, now Berkshire. So I just moved over, and I was in production. I was rookie of the year at the previous company, and I came in with probably 6 or 8 buyers in tow. The one guy that came over with me, he had similar numbers of people, and we had to, we had this thing. They had the thing called, I think it was called the green sheet. And like, I'm
Yep.
like looking at this thing like a deer in headlights. And I'm like going, and so I literally walked around the office and just said, I'm looking for a transaction coordinator. Does anybody want to come work with me? And I literally had somebody join that afternoon and work with me for 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years straight. Was great. And had I went through a recruit select process, one, I wouldn't have got the deals done that I need to get done. And two, I don't know that it would have helped me actually hire anybody better than I got by doing it quickly. And I have countless stories about that, but that's a real one. Like hire quickly and fire slowly.
That's awesome. Sometimes when I hear a buddy who's about to get married, and I don't know, where everyone stands with this, but I was like, have you lived with them yet? Have you lived with them? Because that's when you're really going to get to know somebody is if you live with them before getting married with them. And that's kind of what it reminds me of is just bring them into the business to see how they operate and then fire if obviously they're not hitting all the things that they committed to. Is there anything that you do with all your main hires that all of them get? Is there a certain test or is there something that you do once they enter and maybe not, but it just kind of popped in my mind?
So the one thing that we're like the team that that I work around, the one thing that's hard to measure is hunger and desire. Like
Mm,
they can be competent in a skill, they can seem to have an attitude that is conducive to what we're doing. Um, but the uh, but but it's hard to understand if they're really hungry or if they're just basically trying to get the job. And and so one thing we're doing right now, so this is primarily on the international side because I'm leading international for EXP at the moment, is we're building out a talent bench and we're working on a framework that's similar to a lot of tech companies where we're going to basically overfill the bench in certain categories. And we'll basically put people on 4 to 6 week trials. And
mm,
and during the and at the end of that time, we're going to know who's hungry, who's actually trying to do things. Because you probably fake it for a week or two, but by the time you get to 4 to 6 weeks in, you're either still hungry or you're starting to like go, man, what am I doing? So we're hoping that do they pick up stuff fast? Do they pick up the ball fast? Are they helping teammates score? Are they scoring? Are they helping other? What's their opportunity? So that's something we're kind of in the process of trying to figure out, and to some extent, you just got to put enough people on the field to see which ones are going to be the right ones, and it's going to be a different approach because it's more sort of scaled like a tech company sort of bring people in. But on the core team, I still think that there's a huge amount of value to working one on one with people for significant periods of time and staying highly connected to make sure that they sort of really get into the culture and really understand what it is we're trying to do.
Oh, I love that. We've put together a funnel essentially, and the more we've kind of got rid of the saying that somebody's gonna do something and kind of listening through that. It's very very extremely action based, and the more action that they take that we've laid in front of them, that we've kind of weaved into the understanding if they're going to keep moving or they're going to keep staying hungry, the funnel gets tighter and tighter, which only really brings in more and more time one on one to build in a YFM and which is what's in it for them, and also the vision of what we're trying to build. But it's all action based. It's very action based at this point.
Awesome.
Uh,
Well, good stuff.
yeah, so it's 12:30. I really appreciate it. Don't want to interrupt any more time outside of the hour that you have given us. Is there any last words you want to throw at anyone before I let you go?
No, one, obviously, that EXP is a company that's filled with entrepreneurs. You got, folks like Ruben and so many others, here, myself included. One of the biggest blessings that I sort of get is to work with so many people who are truly trying to make a difference in other people's lives, each and every day, in this business that we call real estate, whether it be helping clients buy or sell homes or helping agents actually get off of the hamster wheel of just of chasing the next deal and not knowing what happens if they get hit by a bus or something catastrophic happens in their life. um, so if for me, that obviously I'd fundamentally don't need to work another day in my life. Like literally don't need to. But I've such a passion for helping people build businesses that I work right now working on with the international team. I'm probably putting in 10 to 12-hour days. I've been doing it for the last 90 days or so. I can't wait to show you some of the stuff that we've accomplished when we do come to eXpCon, because we've got a lot of cool stuff that we've done on the international side. And we're gonna talk about that there. And so there'll be a bunch of announcements sort of post eXpCon of stuff that we're working on. But at the end of the day, surround yourself with people that you want to go into battle with, know has your back, know has your team's back. And if you find a team like that, jump in, stick with them, and then just go for it. So that's my last little piece of advice.
And I appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone who's listening appreciates it as well. And if you're listening to this, you will have an option to ask questions. Just please ask those questions and let us know your ahas and the things that you got out of this. Glenn, thank you so much for your time. If there's ever anything we could do for you, just reach out. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruben. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Chat
Thank
soon.
you. All right. Bye.